So good morning and welcome to day 2 of Primetime STEM. It's my honor to introduce my boss, Steve Wagner, the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary and Acting Assistant Secretary in ACF at Health and Human Services. Steve has a background in public opinion and data analysis, addiction and substance abuse prevention, keeping kids away from illegal drugs, tobacco and alcohol. He was ACF's director of the Anti-Human Trafficking Program. He was at HUD in the faith-based office, and he's won awards from the Anvil. He's the Anvil Award of the Public Relations Society of America. So he has a great background in social policy. He's new to early childhood, but he's a great listener. He's a thoughtful questioner. He's particularly interested in the cost drivers of quality in childcare, and he's a very imaginative leader, and I love working for him. So with no more pause, let's introduce and welcome Steve.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm thrilled to have this opportunity just to say welcome and thank you for your participation today, and thank you to those who are watching on simulcast or web, whatever, and some of our regional staff have joined us today. One of the best parts of my job is to work with Shannon and the fantastic team at the Office of Child Care. It's been a thrill, and it's an area that is a priority for us because we think there are tremendous opportunities for delivery improvements going forward, and I've particularly enjoyed my opportunity to work with the staff in the Office of Child Care. This is a really exciting time, I think, to be in the child care business. You know better than I the tremendous research that has occurred and the fascinating research on brain development, all of which speaks to the importance of having high-quality child care. We've come to appreciate the developmental dynamics of young children in new ways, and it is both fascinating but also critical that we take full account of that research. And I think this is happening. I think that I think there's not only a growing appreciation for child care in general, but certainly an appreciation at the governmental level that we need to do everything we can to move the system toward higher quality delivery, and that is going to be a benefit to all of you and to the industry. I'm really excited about the preschool development grants that the Office of Child Care is managing. They will be coming out before too long. This is an opportunity for the states to engage in some serious strategic thinking about the services they deliver to families with 0 to 5-year-old children, and do strategic thinking and identify gaps in their system, and to start thinking about how to fill the gaps. The preschool development grant will go to the states, but we're really pushing the states to house this grant at a place where there's visibility over all of the services that are being delivered to 0 to 5, both by government but also non-governmental actors and faith-based actors. And we hope the states will really dig down deep, bring together a diverse group of participants to talk about serving the 0 to 5 population. And I think the outcome of this, it's going to be a boon for all of our work. So we're really excited about the opportunity that preschool development grants pose. We also are mindful of the great challenges that we confront. Shannon and the team at Office of Child Care and I are committed to defending a diversified delivery system. We look with concern on the decline in the number of family-based child care providers, which has been pretty dramatic, 150% decline over the 10-year period. And so we want to look at the question of what we can do to preserve diversity in the delivery system. We also are concerned about the escalating cost of child care delivery and the fact that it is causing a decline in the number of children and families served, at least through our programs. That's something we need to take a hard look at. You've started to do that already. That's one of the reasons I'm so fascinated by this panel to be with you today, so that I can hear how these providers are meeting the challenges of workforce and other cost escalators, and we need to address that. In fact, as part of the Preschool Development Grant Program, we will be taking a look through our partner at questions like, what can we do to help you ameliorate some of the pressure that the workforce challenges are putting on the system. So we're going to be looking at costs. We're going to be looking at what we can do to bring more children into the system and more families receiving services so that we can together move forward. The biggest challenge, I think, is for us all to think creatively about bringing quality improvements to all providers of child care, including center-based and grandparents. We want everyone who is taking care of a child to have access to the information that is being developed and to be able to apply that to the kids that they're taking care of. I also wanted to mention regarding the welcome additional appropriation that we got in the current budget. You know, while lead agencies have flexibility to decide how to invest their quality improvement dollars, we really hope that they're going to invest this funding in ways that benefit all child care providers, including non-center-based child care providers. And just a couple of quick examples. When investing in something like quality rating and improvement systems, we encourage lead agencies to make sure that the systems are inclusive of all providers, and I think this is very important, that we look at reframing quality improvement frameworks so that they focus on the things that matter, not on qualifications perhaps in the environment, but on skills and practices in the classroom. So with that, let me close and say again, welcome, and look forward to our discussion this morning. Thank you.
Okay. So now it's time for our interview panel, and I will quickly introduce them because I, as usual, have a few more questions than we probably have time for. Their bios are in your book, but I will quickly go through the list. Chad Dunkley is the CEO for New Horizon Academy and Kinderberry Hill. They operate childcare in 4 states. Next to him is Jacqueline Grant, and Jacqueline is working full-time as a family childcare educator. She's been in that business for 7 years, but she's also the president of Maryland State Family Childcare Association. Then Cisa Keller is the Senior Vice President of Early Childhood Quality Development of Think Small. She joined that group in 2015, so that means you've been there for a while, 8 or so years. I don't want to have to do the math in front of everybody, 3 years. Okay, but you work with families and providers, including CCR&Rs in Minnesota. So that gives you a breadth of background. Elena Yalo is the Chief Academic Officer, second in from the left, the Chief Academic Officer of KinderCare, and you have child care providers in over 30 states, is that right? And then, yeah, wow. Then Lottie Brown, to my right is the owner and operator of family childcare in Connecticut called Crayola Park with a K. And she's been a provider that has had that business for 5 years, but she's been in family childcare for over 20 years. And I had the pleasure of meeting her at the most recent National Association of Family Childcare Conference in Chicago a couple of weeks ago. And Mary Beth is you're like the head of legislative and advocacy and all good things, and helped us put this together. And I can never pronounce, it's Mary Beth Testa, right? But sometimes you put another word in there. I know, Mary Beth Salome Testa, something like that. Anyway, so we just call her Mary Beth. And so she's here heading up this team and helping us out. So thank you for your help, and thank all of you, because we got this idea sort of at the last minute and everyone was willing to join us. And so this is really exciting. We thought it would be helpful for you with all of these policy decisions that you need to make, both in time for the August submission of your 3-year plans and anything you might be thinking about for plan amendments going forward. You've got a lot on your plate and a lot to think about, and I thought it might be helpful to hear from the private sector childcare side how some of the policy decisions that we make impact these providers at the service delivery level. So I have a few questions, and if I ask you something and you don't have an answer that you can sort of pass, and then maybe make it through all 12 questions? Okay, they're really good sports. They must have gone to a good preschool themselves. So just to get us warmed up, I would like each of you to give us a brief introduction, including how your position intersects with CCDF. And Cisa, we can start with you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you again for having me here. Really excited to share a great conversation with this group. So again, I'm Cisa Keller, work for Think Small in Minnesota. We talk about our work in 3 buckets. We strengthen families, we prepare providers, and we catalyze change. We are an R&R in the state of Minnesota. We actually are the R&R for the 7-county metro. Those of you that may or may not be familiar with Minnesota, that basically represents half the state. So we're doing half of the state's work with regard to CDF. And I think what I would say is, in general, we are in a unique position in which I can talk very concretely about policy and what's happening on the ground. So I can match up intent versus impact and let you know whether it's working or whether it's not. And that's really the work that we do.
Okay, Elena?
I'm Alana Yallo. I'm the Chief Academic Officer of KinderCare Education. We operate about 1,400 early childhood centers across 38 states, and I have the great privilege of supporting our educational team, our quality team, and our policy team. And that really is the intersection of making sure that we are aligned with state and federal policies, but also that we have our own quality initiatives that support improving the programs and services for our children and families. One thing that people may not realize about KinderCare Education is that over 1/3 of our children are from lower income families and would only be able to afford attending our programs because of the great support that they're receiving in order to ensure that they have access to the same high quality programs and services that all of our private pay families do. So it's a great privilege to be here, and I so appreciate the opportunity to share some of our insights with you.
Okay,
Hi, again, my name is Jacqueline Grant. I'm also a family child care provider, and so the CCDF affects me as a provider through licensing, accreditation, QRIS, but as my role as the president of Maryland State Family Child Care Association, we are an extremely valuable stakeholder in Maryland, so we are often part of the planning process, and so we are often brought to the table, ask questions how we can better family child care providers and providers in the state. So,
good. Lottie?
My name is Lottie Brown. I am the proud owner of Crayola Park Child Care located in New Haven, Connecticut. I would consider myself as an advocate for families because I am interacting with families on a personal level. My home is a home away from home for young children, and so I am seeing things from ground zero. And with that being said, the policies and procedures and things that are coming down the line with wanting to be in compliance with state regulations, as well as being in compliance with the subsidy requirements that are being asked of providers, families are being directly affected by the decisions that are being made from up top. And so I am pleasure to be here to kind of be that voice for the people who can't be heard, that they would know that, you know, I'm an advocate for them, and that we're willing to talk to the big guys to help stop the or to help impact the decisions that are being made, so that families do not have to quit their jobs because they can't afford childcare, or they, you know, and I'm seeing it, providers being affected where they're either considering going underground, or they're just giving up completely because of the choices that are being made from national and state levels.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Chad Dunkley, CEO of New Horizon Academy, and I have seen what good policies do and bad policies do under the Child Care Development Fund. In Minnesota, as our home state, in 2003, we had a massive cut to the Child Care Assistance Program, and I saw what it did to kids, families, and providers firsthand. We were caring for, like Alana, about 30% of our families were getting access through these funds. Within 15 months, that number cut down to about 15%. I saw providers go out of business. I saw families lose jobs. It was, I mean, we cut income eligibility, we increased co-pays, we froze reimbursement rates. We did a lot of things that was really a mistake, some short-term savings and long-term real negative impacts. But I can also tell you, as a provider, I've watched great policies and how it's impacted kids and families. The recent annual authorizations was one of the most amazing gifts to kids and families. I'm watching the learning and outcomes of kids on programs improve since we've instituted annual authorizations. I'm seeing stabilized families, more successful in the workforce. I'm seeing stabilized providers. And I just talked to a director last week who cares for a lot of families on this program. She saves 3 to 4 hours a week in chasing paperwork and authorizations that she can then focus on kids in the classroom, coaching and mentoring teachers, and things we really want administrators and child care programs to do. So I'm really happy to be here to share the provider perspective of how some of these decisions affect us on the ground in early childhood.
Thank you. So this next question is direct, well, I think the next one I'll give to all of you. What do you most wish state policymakers understood about the day-to-day realities of your job? Is there anything that people would find particularly surprising? And if you could each zero in on one thing. Does anyone want to go first? I know it's a little bit of a think about it.
I can go first. I'll keep going with that pattern. So I think, you know, day-to-day realities, I mean, I'm not sure there's anything surprising. We've all been doing this work for a long time. But I think one thing that I like to highlight is that for our agency and for a lot of us that are doing this work, both for-profit, nonprofit, faith-based programs, we really come at this through a social justice lens. And in particular in Minnesota and my organization, we come at this through the lens of the achievement gap. Everything we do is about making sure our most at-risk kids are in the highest quality care. And so when we see a policy that is not aligned with that, we are constantly trying to work with whether it's the administration or policymakers to really get at that, because we know for all of our children to do well, we need to target those most at-risk children. And in Minnesota, we have some appalling, in fact, some of the worst in the country achievement gaps between our children of color, our Native American children, and our Caucasian children. So,
Thank you. Elena?
So this may not come as a big surprise, but actually the policies that you're making are really driving behaviors at a very localized level, at a center level. And so I think sometimes it may feel like there's a disconnect between policy and practice, but very, very much so. The operators on the ground are trying to make decisions that align with the policies that are being made. I think it's very important to understand that the financial decisions that are made in terms of policy absolutely drive behavior. But sometimes with the good intent to try to follow the complexity of what it means to provide high-quality care, the messages can be very confusing. And if there isn't a really simple, straightforward message to operators, they get lost in the detail of what the expectations are, and it can be very, very distracting. And truly at a center level, in the very busy day of a center director and his or her staff, if things get confusing, they tend to fade away into the background because they simply can't deal with that complexity when they're trying to keep their focus on the children and families that they're serving. So it's very important to understand the impact that you're making through the financial incentives and the policies that you're putting in place. But my appeal to you would be to try to keep it as simple as possible so that people can react to it in a very, very meaningful way, understand what's being asked of them, and then drive their actions forward up against those expectations.
Yeah, when I would have to follow up with that and echo what you're saying is that you also need to ask us, not just at, these nice forums, but ask the providers on the ground, and it would be really surprising what they will tell you and what they need, like the boots on the ground. So I think it's important when you talk to providers and realize that they don't always want to hear what the policymakers are saying, but they will learn so much more from the peer-to-peer mentoring, and by putting the policies through them and giving them that leeway to help organize that, I think it would be much more impactful for them, and it would just be an interesting way to do that.
Thank you.
I would also like to piggyback what she's saying, and the ladies who have gone before me, that I would say that the asset to my program has been that there's an agency in Connecticut like All Our Kin that has, and I think funding really should be poured into organizations like that, because a lot of providers that are on the ground level feel intimidated by the state regulators and by the persons who are making the decisions. But when you have persons that are running organizations that understand what the policies and procedures are, and they come into your home and they're actually helping you, supporting you to become the best you can become, I think there should be, I think they're the bridge. I really believe that they can be the bridge between state policymakers and the family child care providers and other providers who provide care on a larger scale, to bridge the gap between, the actual providers and the policymakers, so that, the support is there, because that's what's needed.
Okay, thank you. Chad?
I think the one addition that hasn't been mentioned yet that I think sometimes surprises people, the number one thing when I talk to child care providers that we all want to do is increase wages and compensation for our teachers. We know the most important thing we can do, it's true, the most important thing we can do to improve the learning experiences of little kids, stabilize the field, increase education level and experience. But I have to tell you, when things like reimbursement rates don't move for 7 years and every one of your expenses goes up during that period of time, you have less resources to do that. I really feel for family child care providers. You pay all your bills first, what's left is what you take home. And we wonder why family child care is shrinking. Well, we know. We know why providers are nervous to go into low-income communities where they rely on resources that don't move with the cost of care. So I can tell you, I don't know a provider that doesn't want to raise wages. It's the number one thing we want to do. We know it will work. And so I guess the only other second thing is use us as allies. We're on the ground. We know how this stuff works. Some places, and I hear this, some agencies see providers as almost the enemy instead of the ally. Nobody goes into early childhood as a provider because they think this is the best place to make money. Most people that I know, they open a program because they don't find something in their community that's good enough for their own kids. Their heart's big, they want to get into it. Many have education backgrounds, not financial backgrounds, and they get into this and find out it's so much harder than I thought it might be. Just loving and caring for kids and wanting to do the right thing does not pay the bills. And providers out there are stressed. They're just hanging on by a thread, and we need good policies that support a stabilized provider community around this country. Our future depends on it.
Thanks, Chad. Yeah, I'll go to the next. I'll go to the next one, and it'll let you piggyback on this. The next question, which I think Lottie wants to piggyback on Chad, but it'll work with this. So pay attention. Okay. As a family child care provider, how have the new CCDF requirements impacted you? Discuss both positive and negative impacts as well as any challenges.
there I go, there's my cue.
Yep.
So I'm definitely excited that you brought that part up because I'm so excited to be here. I missed that part of it. I actually kept my program open and I went and got a job.
Wow.
Because I love what I do, but I did not want to see families that I provide. Only 50% of my program that I offer families who need the subsidy. The other 50% are private paid. Okay, so that 50% that was from the subsidy, when that was cut, it was catastrophic. And so I saw one particular family that she came from the gutter. Like literally she was just climbing out, she was just finishing up schooling, and she had just got a really good job, and then childcare for her was cut. And I took a job so that she would not have to take her children out of care. So I was running my program all day and working till midnight at night so that her children can stay in the program. And so I was not only was that family affected, but I personally was affected so that I could still provide quality care for her children and they not get swept away into whatever is in the streets.
Now I have a quick follow-up for you. When you say,
Oh, thank you, God.
when you say childcare was cut in Connecticut, was your reimbursement rate cut, or was how did it go down? What was the cut?
So basically, what happened is they shut the program down. It was closed for families who had, it's not open to people who don't work. If you're home, you can stay home with your own kids.
Right.
But if you're working and the subsidy program is closed, then you can't even apply for it. You can't, there's no funding now because it's closed. So not only was I affected, but I talked to like a lot of providers we have this All Our Kin network is a wonderful network, but we all talk. So I'm talking to other providers and like their program suffered. Some of them lost like 5 children. So no, you can't pay your mortgage, you can't pay lights, you can't pay anything because that program closed down for, even if it was 6 months, people were affected. If it's reopened magically, how do you recover from that after the damage has been done?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, do you want me to repeat it, or are you okay?
No, it's okay.
All right.
It's actually perfect because I wanted to also piggyback on what Chad said on that we need compensation, but it cannot be on the backs of parents because they are suffering just as much as the providers are. And we need to find new innovative ways to help put the providers forward and help them, through Maryland has some great new news with eligibility expansions. Our QRAS excels has added bonuses. And so by adding those new supports in place for the providers and for the families, we are able to serve more families and children. But it's funny because I was talking to Mary Beth the other day, and she always asks me, do you serve subsidy children? And for about 30 years that my mom has been a family child care provider, we have not received one call for subsidy. And I'm like, I think it's because we're too far from the bus line. We don't get any calls because the access is not available to all families. And so when we talk about serving subsidy families, we really need to find more ways to help the families that need it in all areas. So.
Interesting. Yes, Lisa?
As the R&R in Minnesota, we work a lot with family child care. It's actually a focus for us. And just wanted to highlight a couple of things as well. As Chad and Lottie and Jacqueline have talked about, we're really excited about the annual authorizations. That is really helping families a lot. I'm just going to even raise it to the high level of the fact that the new reauthorization very specifically calls out, not only is this a work support, but this is about child development as well. Just that messaging around the children are as important as the families, and you can't separate those two is really, really significant. And in doing that, we also are starting to raise the professionalism of the field. We have a long way to go, but those new regs are helping us in kind of having that conversation. At the same hand, we are seeing challenges quite a bit, though, and it does go back to the rates. And I'm going to take it one step further, in which not being able to meet the requirements around 75th percentile. The rates are not even close to that in any states. I don't think there's any state at this point.
There are a few.
Oh, there's a couple? All right, where are you? Because I'm moving there. They are not in Minnesota, even close to the 75th percentile. And so when we talk about the rates, we know, I'm going to make two links here. We know that there are a lot of providers, particularly family child care providers, that have struggles with regulation. There's a lot of complaints around we're overregulated, there's too many regulations. But my sense is, and our experience is, if you can actually deal with the rates, so the take-home pay is actually significant, and they're actually making a profession, you actually reduce the amount of complaints there are around regulation. Regulation is an easy thing to come after, right? I don't like these different things, but really it's a symptom of the fact that we don't have enough take-home pay going into family child care's pockets as well as center pockets. So.
Is there a particular regulation that you hear about most? Because I think it's hard to take action unless we hear a little bit more specifics.
Yeah, so this is, I mean, in my work in a variety of states, every state's got different regulatory
but
things.
if you just give us an idea of one or two.
But in Minnesota, we hear quite a bit around the paperwork, the processes, the nature of licensing, whether it is punitive versus supportive, and in addition to a lot of conversations around background study requirements.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. The next question, we're going to switch to our bigger chains. You probably hate to be called that. What do you call yourselves?
Multi-state providers.
Okay, we're going to switch to the multi-state providers and ask, as a large organization that operates in multiple states, what are some of the common issues related to CCDF subsidy policy that you see arising, positive or negative, in multiple child care systems? And feel free to do comparisons, as Chad did. And have there been some policies that you've seen that have had a particular impact, positive or negative, on your work?
So I want to echo, I think what's been said by many of us on the panel is that annualized authorizations have been one of the biggest beneficial policy changes that we've seen. And it not only impacts the continuity of care, but I think, as Chad alluded to, there's a tremendous deflection of resources when families are coming on and off authorization. So it impacts their family, it impacts their child. It also impacts the center leadership, who is trying to support families, give them information. But as these families are coming and going, they do not have the ability, they're so distracted with some of the paperwork challenges themselves that they can't do what they do best, and the reason that they're there is to take care of children and families. So moving towards annual authorizations has been an incredible beneficial impact for children and families, but also for the whole infrastructure that is designed to support them, but is otherwise so completely distracted trying to chase different funding streams and help support families and how to navigate through that. One of the other kind of themes of that, though, is we need, to the extent that there could be more consistency across states, absolutely recognizing that every state has its own policy issues, its own budgetary issues, and different populations that it's serving. Because of the differences that states have, when you're thinking about some kind of national network or multi-state network, and you want to provide consistency of support to the team, so to make their life easier so they can, again, keep their focus on their children and families. Some of the complete inconsistencies when you have somebody who's supporting somebody across one state border versus another, and they have a whole different set of regulatory issues, reimbursement issues to deal with, it really adds a complexity into the system that is challenging. We also, I think, tend to operate almost at the last minute. You know, there's a certain timeline for you to get your policies in place, and then it very quickly impacts the field. Well, that means it very quickly impacts families who are trying to make plans and choices and need to know whether or not they're going to have access to high-quality care or not. And they may be finding out at the last minute, yes, they will, or no, they won't. So really thinking in terms of the life cycle of a family, they need to know, they need better information so they can make planning choices for their families. They don't know whether they're going to be taken off a wait list, placed on a wait list, have the ability to have access to high-quality programs and services. And so the sort of immediacy and the reactive nature of some of the policy decisions really directly impact families who are trying to make lifelong choices for their children and can't do it because they know they're subject to an immediate policy change that will change the very dynamic of the families that they're trying to serve.
Okay, thank you.
Mind if I add a little to that?
No, I want you to.
What I really want to do is give you some examples just in my own organization in the last 6 months of decisions we're making based on what states are doing with CCDF policy or child care assistance policies. We're expanding right now in Iowa and Colorado, and I think both states are doing something they think is so wonderful for families, they don't allow providers to charge the difference. But as I'm looking at making decisions to sign a 20-year lease in communities, I have to rely on those states to keep up with the cost of care to open a program that primarily serves children on the Child Care Development Fund. And I don't have faith the federal government's going to double child care funding every few years to make that happen. It's really on the states to do that, and states have really been stepping back from their responsibility. I want to do it. In those locations, rates are not where they need to be to cover, I think, the cost of quality. But I am going to allow 10 families to join each of my new programs there right now, because if I do more than that, my other families have to subsidize the difference. In Minnesota, I was ready to move forward. There's child care desert information in Minnesota right now about where the communities don't have care. And in our budget agreement, we had a reimbursement rate increase using federal dollars. It got vetoed because it was put in a giant bill and the politicians didn't agree. And I pulled off 3 projects, including one in Greater Minnesota in a community that now doesn't have a single child care center. So yes, these decisions affect the decisions we're making every single day. And so anyway, there was one other one I think I wanted to, yeah, those
We'll
are
give you another
those are the
chance.
rest for now.
Do
Okay,
you think
thank
of it? Okay, thank you, very helpful. Let's go back to the decline in family child care providers for a minute. We've seen a big decline, as Steve mentioned, and you've talked about as well. What do you think is a primary factor behind this trend, and do you have any recommendations about how states could address the issue? And this is for Jacqueline, Lottie, and Cisa. Who wants to go first?
I can.
Okay.
I can go, being at the end down here. So I'm actually going to push back and say that there isn't one factor. I think it's a combination of factors, and I really attribute it to kind of 3 things. One, I think it's an aging population. We have changing demographics. Individuals that got into family child care for reasons 20, 30 years ago are not the same reasons that people would get into child care today. So the aging population, I think, is significant. There's the inadequate funding streams. I think you've heard this loud and clear from all of us. Not having enough stable funding streams, it's pretty hard. I mean, my oldest children are starting to look at college, and you have the conversation about where do you want to go into, and I pray every day they never say early childhood, because who of us wants our children to go into this business when there's just not the stable financial incentives that they're going to have a robust life and a great take-home pay. And then finally, just to call it the elephant in the room, this increase in trying to move 4-year-olds into exclusively school-based settings is significantly undercutting the business of childcare. The business model cannot support not having the 4-year-olds. We need to have a birth to 5 model in childcare, and actually for many of us, it's birth through age 12. And when you take those 4-year-olds out, we can't do it. So I really think it's a combination of those 3 things. To the second part of the question, as we look at what solutions are, I think they're, we'll start with rates, right? Let's get the rates where they need to be, and not to just the market, but to the true market. So we know that providers generally charge whatever the reimbursement rate is, right? And so what is the true cost of high quality care? So we need to increase the amount of funding. We need to make sure that all the states are meeting the federal standards. I know in Minnesota, and I know a lot of states are still not in compliance with the reauthorization. So trying to get to that point.
Can you say which part of reauthorization?
So, for example, in Minnesota, we have not yet, we tried last session, the last 2 sessions. We're not in compliance with some of the homeless things. We're not yet in, remind me, Chad, I think we're not in
We have till the end of August.
Yeah, we're not going to make there. So legislative session's not till January. So send us a letter, please. Same reimbursement rates, we're not where we need to be. So, there's lots of things we need to do. It's not for lack of trying, we just have not been able to move it at the legislature. Trying to do more with the quality set aside. We're making great strides, but trying to do more with that. Very intentionally, we've talked about the decline in family child care, and I think it's not just family child care, it's centers, as Chad and Alana have talked about. We need to intentionally put supports around that. I think we've all acknowledged that in our quality rating improvement systems, we need to coach people along. How do we help, meet them where they're at and then move them forward in their quality? We have to do the same thing for setting up a business. As Chad mentioned, I think earlier, many people get into this for the love of children and families. They don't get into it because it's a great business. But then we come back 2 years later and we wonder why people are financially struggling. So we need to intentionally be supporting those new providers.
Great, thank you.
So we've all said that there's a decrease in family child care, but the branch chief of Maryland Excels, which is our QRS in Maryland, gave me some figures this morning. So in August 2017, we had 5,942 family child care providers and large family. In August 2018, we had 5,131. We have lost 811 family child care providers in just 1 year. That is a huge drop. So we ask ourselves, where are they going? Are they going underground? Are they leaving the workforce? Or is society just not appreciating family child care as they used to? We know that family child care has so many benefits, including siblings, that we can care for both siblings, continuity of care, low ratios, home-cooked meals, and a whole family experience. So when you ask what can states do to help address this, it's parent education. We have to continuously educate our parents about what quality childcare is.
Thanks.
And we're back over here to me again. So I agree with the things that have been stated already. However, not only do families need to be educated, I think I'm right back to the organizations for support for family child care providers. I myself as a provider offer parenting classes once a month for my families. After you see certain things over and over again, instead of just pointing out one particular family, I'll have a presenter come in on that Thursday night meeting that's for the month and focus on giving families or those parents information that they need. But if you have organizations or agencies out there like All Our Kin that can also support, then that agency can send in people for me to assist with educating parents and giving them the information that they need also. Now, I would like to also point out that same agency, All Our Kin, has I went through their quality showcase program, which they came into my home and they assisted me with raising the level of quality that I was providing for families so that I can achieve the NAFC accreditation, which is the National Association for Family Child Care Providers, and I achieved that goal. And not only did I achieve that goal, what I did is they're showcasing my program on this website. And literally prior to coming here, I had a family that saw that website and said, you know what, we've been searching all around. Our baby is not due until October, but we saw all these pictures. We wanted to meet you. We want to see for ourselves what your program looks like on the inside. And if the agency was not, I describe the agency as my husband, to be in a nutshell. I'm the mommy, the agency is my husband, the program is the baby, and my husband is very supportive. My husband loves me. My husband protects me. My husband makes sure that whatever I'm struggling in, he's not gonna just throw me under the bus. No, he's gonna pick me up and support me through the places where I'm weak, and I'm okay with him seeing my flaws. I'm okay with the agency, knowing that maybe I'm a little bit weak in this area, but they're there to come and help me figure out how do I talk to a family that has real issues, like they can't provide food for their children. How can I give them the resource that they need to get the assistance that they may need? Those agencies are important. They're important because, and I've talked to other providers who do not connect with the agency, such as myself, because for whatever reasons, they feel intimidated because they can't maneuver the computer system the way I can, or they can't go on the websites and figure out things, because everybody is not where I am. Some providers are literally struggling with just how to access the subsidy and how to do all that. So everybody is in different places, but I really think if we could get those support systems out there and that funding and help providers such as myself, and the providers are educated, families are educated, we will see that the little people are not being left behind, because ultimately they're the ones that are affected by every decision that's made.
Shannon, can I add a comment of a study on family child care that might be relevant to this conversation? So First Children's Finance, I think somebody's here in Minnesota, did a study on costs of family child care and wages. They figured that in Minnesota, the average family child care provider works about 13 hours a day and pays themselves $8 an hour, no overtime. Now, the minimum wage in Minnesota went up to $9.65. The numbers are pretty clear. Family child care is doing it for way less than they're worth, and parents just can't afford it. So there's this struggle. The market dynamics are not really working. And many of those wonderful family child care providers are going to other jobs because they have to support their own families. And that's the reality. But those studies are out there. We have to do something about reimbursement rates because it's on the backs of the people caring for kids.
Okay, so this is a good segue. I'm going to skip ahead because of what you started with, Lottie, to our consumer education question. So this is, what kind of information should parents have in order to make the best child care choices for their family? And in your experience working directly with families, is there key information you wish that child care, as the CCDF lead agency, had given them? Anyone want to start on that one?
Keep starting at the end.
You want to let somebody else start?
Or yes, somebody else want to go?
Does somebody else? No, we're letting you do it because you're the only one who wants to. So go for it.
Okay. When we talk about consumer education, I'm going to tout what we've done in Minnesota. I think it's something I'm really proud of as our team, in which we built our quality rating improvement system through the lens of parent empowerment. Our entire QRIS is about how do we provide information to families for them to make the choices that are in the best interest of their children. That is really how we approach consumer education, is through the lens of quality. So what does quality mean for you? We've created a system in which we're measuring through the lens of school readiness, and now you have all the information at your fingertips, and so now you can make that choice. And so at its core, I think it's, I guess the way I think about this is we need to meet families where they're at, provide them the information they need with context, right? So is it school readiness, it's quality, what are all these things that are so important, cultural relevance, all these things, and then let them choose. They know what's in their best interest for their children at that time, and also recognizing that those choices may change. So the decision they may make as an infant may be different than when they make for a 4-year-old or for their second child. And so just making sure that we've got that information and we're meeting them where they're at.
So this is something we struggle with, is in what form do they want that information? Because I think that Lottie's right. Sometimes there's a lot of trouble struggling with the computer, and yet we have everyone moving to the computer to make it easier, because there are a lot of people who like the 24/7 availability of computer information and being able to go through it really fast. So as states are thinking about how they meet the new consumer education requirements, it might be helpful if you have an insight about how that information needs to be delivered, that you share that.
I'm actually going to use what Jacqueline said about providers. Ask them. I mean, I think we need to ask parents, how do you want that information? We may have some communities that really need to have an outreach, right? So a person that's actually showing up and providing them information, particularly our cultural communities, in their home language, and providing them that information as well as context around what that is. Is it social media? Is it web-based? Is it via the providers, right? I mean, we know that providers themselves become. Is it your mom's club? I mean, I think we need to go to parents and we need to ask them, how do you want the information information and what's the information that's most important to you. If we want to know what they want to know, ask them.
Okay, others?
So I think a lot of the work that we've done in terms of setting up QRIS systems or star ratings or focusing on accreditation are valuable to parents because it's a shorthand way of helping differentiate higher quality programs from those that may not meet the same quality standards. At the same time, I think we've kind of created a gap because we've given parents sort of targets to look for versus helping them understand some of the fundamentals about what quality really looks like. So it helps families maybe kind of navigate through some of the complexity, but I don't think we spend enough time helping both validate parents' intuition about what feels right to them, and also to help them understand what are some of the key components to be looking for, independent of whether the center is accredited, independent of what star rating has, that it's looking for the relationships and the interactions between caregivers and young children. It's looking for having confidence that the children are actually going through experiences that are helping them grow and develop and be more ready for school. So I think there's a second layer of parent information that is pretty absent from the system, and until we help them become better consumers from an understanding about what really matters in terms of supporting their children's development versus giving them a lot of sort of checklists to work from, we've taken them part of the way, but we haven't really empowered them to ask the hard questions, to really look at the programs that they're thinking about putting their children in, whether it's family daycare, whether it's center-based care, or whether it's even having sort of friends or neighbors watch their child. What are the things they should be looking for to make sure their child is having a rich experience? So I do think there is a challenge on all of us to go deeper and explaining why the things that we're saying are indicators of quality really make a difference when it comes to their individual child.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have to agree with everything that has been said. In Maryland, I have to say, we have brand new leadership, and one of their focuses is parent education and consumer education. In fact, we just launched a new website, marylandfamiliesengage.org. And so we have to look at what today's parents look like. And moms really listen to moms, just like providers listens to providers. So I think we need to find a way, as what was mentioned, we have to get in the community. We have to find out what they want to see and what they value, what quality education is.
Great.
I would like to add to what you're saying, but also point out that there is a level of flexibility that happens in family child care that doesn't happen on a center-based level or school readiness. That is, for Connecticut, a lot of the school readiness and programs have entered into the public school system. So what I'm seeing that's happening is that we're affected. Family child care providers are being affected because no family is going to want to pay for child care if they can have it for free as early as 2 years and 9 months in the public school system. And so we have been directly impacted by that, but our regulations for ratios have not changed on the state level when we can't provide care for children all the way to age 4.5 or 5. Not that you would really want to, but for infants and toddlers and for even preschool age, I think that there are creative ways that we can get information to families. It could start as early as giving information right from the hospital. A lot of organizations do that. They kind of give parents, parenting does not come with a handbook. Who's a mastermind behind knowing how to raise a life? No, none of us are, but we have years of experience, but parents need to be kind of guided along. So with all the other stuff that hospitals give families when the babies are first born, you know what? Let's give them some information about what quality looks like and what they can be on the lookout for. I would also say there are social clubs. I know in Connecticut there are a lot of mommy and me time things that are happening at public libraries and other things. I think we really need to put some people out on the ground because everybody is not computer savvy and everybody does not have a smartphone, even though it seems like there are. There is a community of people out there who just do not have access to all the luxuries as some of us who are sitting in this room.
Can I just add one comment?
Yes, please.
Parent education, maybe it hasn't been handled perfectly. Quality rating systems have some things that are important and measured, and we're measuring some things maybe we shouldn't. But for the most part, the more information we can provide families, the better they can be advocates for their kids. Sometimes parents don't know what the developmental milestones should be if their child is getting what they need. I think we need well-educated parents. That also prepares them when they get to the public school system to demand more as well if their children are not thriving. And so this is an area where we got to keep working and developing. But I think I've watched at least our rating system in Minnesota transform for families, that they should be asking more and looking for more than my child seems to be happy. And I think that's really, really important, especially now that we know the brain research says these first years are so critical that it should be more than that. So I'm a real proponent of it.
Okay, thank you all. Okay. Let's talk about effective quality investments. What are some of the effective ways that you've seen states invest in the quality of the child care system? And are there examples of investments that did not have a strong impact? So pros and cons on quality investments. Anyone want to go first?
I'm happy to break with tradition and take a stab at that. So investments in quality are absolutely critical. As I said kind of in my opening comments, it does drive behavior. So it's important to, it both recognizes people who have uplifted their own quality standards and gives them more resources to continue that tradition, and encourages those who may not, who may want to be doing the best thing for the children and families that they're serving, but may not have the resources to actually change behaviors and do more for their educators and for their families. We at KinderCare made a commitment 5 years ago to achieve 100% accreditation, just because we knew we had a national platform with varying licensing standards and wanted to make sure that people who came to a KinderCare program knew that we were going to be an accredited center and meet some national standard. But I can tell you that was actually initially a little bit of a hard sell into our own field because they felt like they couldn't do it because of all the variety of state requirements. And once we kind of built the momentum around that, it was almost remarkable to see the snowball effect of everybody getting on board with saying, yes, this is what we stand for. But we were in kind of a unique position. Chad has done the same thing in his programs, but most operators don't make those choices. They have to make they make choices based on what financial opportunities they have, because they're in very low margin situations and really struggling to be able to provide the right facilities and training for their teachers. So funding quality initiatives makes a huge difference. I also want to say that it's really critical. It's been a little bit confusing when there's licensing standards, national accreditation, and then state QRS systems, all of which are very different. It's confusing to some extent to families who don't necessarily understand the difference between all those things. They hear accreditation, they think it must be accredited. They hear, they assume that everybody's going to be licensed or not licensed. And so as much as there can be alignment, particularly around national accreditation and QRS, we faced some challenges in our own system where we did make this commitment to national accreditation. We said we also were very interested in ensuring that we're operating at the highest star ratings in the states we operate in. And for a while, it was just a confusing message, because people thought, well, accreditation means quality, but now you're saying QRS means quality. And so making sure that there's stronger alignment so that there can be a the message we tried to promote is that they're all looking at quality, maybe from different angles, but the fundamental things that as a field you're being asked to do as educators, as teachers, and as center leadership, they're fundamentally the same kinds of things. They may be looking for some different specifics, but it just makes it hard. It makes it hard and confusing for the field when there's different quality measures that don't necessarily align and come together. So I'd encourage a hard look at that. The third thing goes back to an earlier point, trying to keep particularly these QRS systems a little bit more simple. Often with very good intent, for instance, in some states, recognizing that there's a lot of paths to great educators, they've created career laddering systems that are so complicated. Honestly, it's so hard to explain to a local operator what the expectations are, what's being asked of them, and again, then they gloss over and say, I can't do this, it's too much, even though they actually might be able to achieve expectations if they were just simplified and made more straightforward. So think about how digestible the information is, how simple it is, because if people have the clarity about what's being asked of them and they understand that it's in the best interest either of their teachers and then clearly of their children and families, they will want to align around it. But if it gets too confusing, we lose them.
Shannon, can I add something that I think before all of you, is a decision about where to spend these new quality dollars. If you, on the ground, the reality and challenge is workforce. Everything you can do to support workforce, helping people go back to school, programs like Teach, the Wages Project out of North Carolina is showing such promise. We've talked about this field has this challenge. Young families have 9 months to plan for a very expensive cost of childcare. They're early in their income cycle. There's only so much they can afford, yet wages aren't rising, yet expectations for our education level of teachers are rising. But these programs, these kinds of supports, really do stabilize the workforce, help keep them in programs, and help teachers go back to school. So anything about workforce right now, it's the most important and pressing need. There was one statistic, in 1975, 21.6% of people going to get a BA were in an education-related field. That's down to 7.6%. So the reality of this field is, if we want more highly educated teachers, we have to grow them through our programs, help them go back to school, get degrees in an affordable way, that they don't carry big student loan debt, so they can stay and do amazing work with kids and families. Please put all your money in a program like Teacher Wages.
Thank you.
And then I'll just add, so I think one thing that we've done really, really well with the CCDF funds is the state's work in the QRIS, right? So this emphasis on quality, the emphasis on child development, how this really supports children. At the same time, we've put so much work and are doing so much on the improvement of QRIS, that we've lost or have made decisions to not work on sustainability. I'd argue that there should be a QRISS, right? Improvement and sustaining. So we're asking providers to get to a high level of quality, but then we don't offer them any supports to sustain that quality. As with anything with learning, it's not a one-up. You don't get there and then it's just done. You have to constantly be putting effort into sustaining that quality. And so I think that directly affects what's happening. And I'm going to make a correlation. You know, in Minnesota, Think Small just recently did a survey on providers that had closed their businesses over the last 2 years, between 2015 and 2017. And we actually saw a correlation between the percentage of providers that had participated in our quality rating improvement system were less likely to close their doors. I don't know what the exact correlation is, but there's something to participation in QRIS and keeping their doors open. So I would just really encourage you, as you look at your QRIS, to really focus on those that have actually gotten to that level of quality and how do you continue to support them as well.
Okay. Do you have comments?
Sure, if you don't mind. So I've already talked briefly about the quality investments that we're doing here in Maryland. So as some of you may or not know, again, we have new eligibility expansion with our subsidy. Our QRS is starting to do bonuses. We have a credentialing program, and we have a college and career development professional development fund, a lot of letters. And where we're able to send providers to college and not have to pay one dime. All you have to do is return years back into the field. And I've been able to go, as well as other members of my family, and been able to get our AA, and we're now working on our bachelor's degree in early education. And I have to say, I was having a conversation with our director of the Office of Child Care, Jen Nizer, last night, and I told her, I said, my mom has been a family child care provider for 30 years, and she would never go back to school if it wasn't for that fund. And that is a huge, huge deal for providers, because again, we're talking about how much we make in the workforce and how much we do for families. It's great when states give back to the providers.
Any thoughts? Or we're covered. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Back to the rates, and if we might have covered this all, but do CCDF reimbursement rates impact your business practices, and if so, how? I know you've talked a lot about it, so this is just a chance if there's anything we didn't catch.
I can just give some specific examples within KinderCare. So our current discount for for subsidy is about 30% off our private pay rate. And what we have found, KinderCare is will soon be a 50-year-old company next year. So we have a lot of centers that are in communities that have either aged or the demographics have changed. And one of the things we found is that in some markets that are completely 100% dependent on block grant funding, even when those centers are completely full, at the reimbursement rates that we are being reimbursed at, the center is still losing money. And then we have to make a very painful decision about whether or not we continue to operate those programs, knowing that they are being subsidized by the families, private pay families in surrounding communities, or to shut the center when it may be one of the few remaining centers in an underserved market. So it's very clear, even with a larger company where we can pool resources to support programs in communities where we are completely dependent on subsidy rates to support the center, it creates a very difficult decision, and certainly discourages investment of new, higher quality programs going into those markets because they simply are not viable.
Okay, so let me ask one more question, because you are the one that operates in the most states. When we look at our data, we see that there are some states reimbursing in certain areas where less than 10% of the market is available to a subsidized child, and others that are close to 75 to the 75th percentile. So it's hard for us to know when people say we need to raise the rates. How can it really be all of them? And if it's all of them, it can't be all of them the same way. So how can you help this group, if you can, differentiate between always wanting more rates and something that helps us be strategic about it?
And I think it's, the analysis that we've done internally is we've actually looked at how much we're discounting for subsidized children. So it's a pretty easy analysis, and you can compare what the reimbursement rates are like compared to the state average. And in some cases, the rates are very strong, and that's where you'll see most programs open to all children. There's also the base rate, and I think that's one thing that is really important to focus on when we're talking about quality systems and using that as a carrot to encourage higher quality programs. We also have to look at the base rate. In many cases, the base rates are not going up. There is more tiering for higher quality programs, but you also have to look at the foundational rate that is being paid in support. And there, the argument would be, let's at least start by raising the base rate before we go into quality tiering, because not everybody is going to be in a position, at least in the short run, to be able to meet the quality expectations. We want them to move towards that, but they need a base level that makes the programs viable in those communities. And in some cases, the argument is the base rates are pretty solid, and now let's use our resources to support quality tiering. So you can do a state or market analysis pretty simply that can help say, what's that gap, and what's the best way to close that gap? And that's what we do in terms of our own advocacy issues. So there are some markets, again, or some states, reimbursement rates are very, very strong. To us, the issue is let's have more children have access versus raising the rates. So
I see. Okay, so it is different.
yeah.
So rates, one of the things that, and I almost don't want to say that to you guys, states have really gotten off easy. In public education, 80% of funding comes from the states and 20% from the federal government. Why is it that states think that 80% of the money should come from the federal government and only 20% should come from states? States since 2003 have said, oh, it's the federal government's responsibility, and rates are a really expensive fix, so we're only going to do it if the federal government gives us money. You know what? The benefits that come from kids being ready for school, people working and staying in the workforce, furthering their education, all the benefits you look at with economists, those go right back to the states. Not repeating kindergarten, first grade. So I hate to take it off Mr. Secretary and others, but the federal government, you guys out here in the states have to pressure your states and your governors. This is not the federal government's job alone. It is your turn to step up. And with reimbursement rates in so many places around the country, and the rates are way too low to pay anybody a livable wage. And if you really did reimbursement rates right in markets where there's real competition and private families can afford real costs of quality, rates are higher than they are in almost any other place. There's good examples of that, but we're ignoring it. It's time for the states to do it. And the rule says you have to use a most recent market rate survey. I think you guys have to have confidence to punish a few states that don't, because you just gave them hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars to fix this system, and maybe it's a small penalty the first year, maybe you take $1 million and you threaten it's going to be 20 million next year. But we need, as advocates, something back in the states to say, look, we're not going to let you get away with this anymore, legislators. Do something about your reimbursement rates, because this isn't working. It's not working for kids and families.
Can I add one more comment to this? So
Sure.
I think we've heard a lot about how the rates affect existing providers pretty robustly, but I want to add that really reduced rates also significantly impact our ability to encourage people to come into this field. Again, back to that, how do you encourage them when you know that the rates are so low? So I just want to highlight that as well, that it's not just about existing providers, it's about future providers as well.
Great, thanks, Isa. I think that we'll segue into the increased funding question, which, as you noted, Chad, the funding levels have increased in 2018 and given CCDF lead agencies an opportunity to re-examine some spending and policy decisions. What would you like policymakers to keep in mind as they do so? And anyone who has I know we've been touching on the rates and money, but
So I just like to add one thing that obviously the new money is going to make a huge impact, but what it's really going to do is just narrow the gap between where we are and where we need to be. It's not. It feels like an abundance of riches, but we're so far behind that it's just a small investment in starting to catch up and closing the gap of needed resources. The other kind of related point is sometimes when you're dependent on outside funding to support families, it's sort of feast or famine. Like this year, it seems like, okay, there's going to be some significant rate increases, and then we're going to sit flat for another 7 years or another 10 years. And every year, the cost of providing quality care goes up. Our teachers need they need to know that they have career paths, that they will have consistent increases in their wages, and that we continue to reinvest and invest in our programs in terms of improved facilities, higher quality programs, professional development, and the thought that there'll be a good year and you'll get a big bump, and then you're going to sit and kind of erode, that number is going to erode over the course of the next year. It makes very difficult to run a business, and it makes it very difficult to enter a field where there's that much uncertainty, and you're subject to whatever the immediacy of the funding availability is. So really thinking about long-term planning, we talk about preparing like children for a lifetime. Those who provide services to those families, they need to have some sense of longevity. As Chad said, there are markets that we would all love to build new centers in, but because we know that the stroke of a pen can take away the financial support for those programs, and those families will no longer have access, makes it almost impossible to make a decision to enter communities where we know we are sorely needed. So we have to move away from this sort of feast or famine. You get more money and there's this big bump, versus really thinking about longer-term strategic planning on behalf of our children and the teachers and educators that serve them.
So I have a little bit of a related question, is that it's more than just the reimbursement rate itself that can impact your finances, and this may be more important for the smaller organizations, but the way states pay, and whether it's by attendance or enrollment, and whether or not you get paid before or after, and what states have to go through to count up the hours, and some of those provider-friendly or family-friendly policies that actually do cost states money, and they have to spend time thinking about. Do you have guidance on that, or are you just mostly focused on the actual reimbursement rate?
Go ahead.
You can all answer that, whoever has an idea.
And I think I provided this to you. Absent date policy is one of those things that's extremely frustrating. Many times people want to treat the child care funding almost like a consumable, like bread. If somebody doesn't buy that bread, it'll be there for the next consumer. Well, it doesn't work that way in early childhood. If a family comes for 2 hours tomorrow or 8 hours tomorrow, my expenses exist. So we have to have policies that are based on the reality of how child care center budgets work. I'm not sending that teacher home because one child didn't come. Every child has to not come, and that teacher needs to be paid. And so it's the same, your rent exists, all of those things. So we have to start thinking about that. I sent to Shannon because people were wondering in Minnesota, what is a reasonable amount of absent days? So I studied 1,000 private pay families. And I said, how many days do they miss on average? It was 25.9 days a year without legal holidays. Young families have a lot of things going on. If grandma's in town, if they go to a doctor's appointment, sometimes a parent has an extra day off, they have vacations. But remember, our budgets exist whether that's true or not. So I can tell you as a provider, I won't locate in a state where I just get paid by the hour because that's not how I pay my bills.
Others on these?
Yeah.
You know, one other thing, you asked about this ARA funding. One other piece of advice, you know, this new federal funding is meant to be baseline. The 2019 budgets in both the House and Senate show this money continuing. And so for those of you going back to states and hearing, I'm not trusting the federal government is going to keep sending it, for now we see no signs that's changing. So I hope you can go back with confidence and say, this money is meant to really permanently fix and restructure our system, not just take care of a few extra kids for a year.
And I was just going to add, you know, again, so as you're going back to states and implementing this, I think because of the scarce resources, you know, whether it's because states have not put in enough, because we're making up all these different things, we inadvertently are creating crises because we're having conversations of, is it rates versus access versus quality? And we're constantly trying to kind of make arguments in each of those three buckets. And what I would tell you is it's not an either or, it's a both and. We need all of those components to have a really robust CCDF plan. And so I just encourage you to not let your staff and the conversations in your states to ever get to that point where we're picking and choosing.
Yeah, but that, I hate to say it, but that's not how people live. I mean, we've been spending the last 2 days talking about trade-offs. And I agree that money can come from other places. It might not be our deal. And I think that there's a lot of payoff for investing in early childhood. But right now, these states are dealing with the budgets they have and having to make real trade-offs. So to the extent you can use this last question in some way to help guide them. And I think everyone in their hearts knows it's a both and how much this stuff costs. But their jobs require them to sort through the budget and pick one thing over the other. And even if it's a quality investment, where am I going to get more bang for the buck? When I make any of these choices around, do I make my payment process different, or do I raise the overall rate but not mess with the absences? I mean, they are trading off. So it would help them if you do have some ranking to share it. And it doesn't mean that we don't know that that doesn't do it, okay? So, but it does help right now when people have to make real decisions. So the last question I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to let Steve make some comments, and then if we have a couple minutes left, Trish is in charge of the minutes, we could take a couple questions. So our last official question here is, what is the one thing policymakers can do to best support your work? I'm sorry, it's the last thing from a both and. So you probably want to go last. What's the one thing?
Go ahead, Chair.
I think seeing providers as an ally is really important. We are on the ground. We really are passionate. There's nothing that makes me more proud than taking a child from a disadvantaged situation and getting them ready for school. I'm really proud to serve children on the Child Care Assistance Program. I'm watching specific families, because now we have so many, because I love to hear the stories and know the stories about the impacts we can make by serving kids in these programs. And like I said, it makes us proud, but we can't do it when you have policies that don't match with our expenses. So please, bring providers to the table. I know Minnesota's done a really good job the last few years saying, come, tell us how it really is on the ground for kids and families.
Great. Do you want to go next, Elaine?
Well, I would also like to see not only base rates increased or money put into the program for family child care providers, but I like to see more money allocated for education. And you know, I paid for my school, and I just graduated with my AA in May, and I don't see any reimbursements coming for me paying for going back to school. But truth be told, just this college experience for me and where I am right now financially with the daycare and everything, I am really considering jumping ship. So I am living in living color, flesh of one of those persons who's in this field. I love it, but the reality is I'm getting older and I'm thinking about retirement. I don't want to be one of those persons that's trying to decide whether to buy food or to pay for medication. So part of me, I'm really thinking about, nobody's really thinking, you're not making enough money to dump money away for your retirement. You're not making enough money so that you can live comfortably down the line, because you're not going to be able to take care of children until you're 80 and 90. So wake up, this is your reality. So I have been entertaining other avenues of education so that I can really make a living, because right now I'm working other jobs and trying to still run the program because my heartstrings are being pulled by the needs of family. So definitely an increase and support for organizations like the one that I am a part of, that they can continue to bridge the gap between state policies and policymakers and providers who do need the support.
Thank you. Who wants to go next?
I feel like I've already said this, but it's so important that I have to say it again, that we need to listen to the providers. As I said, I have to brag a little bit about Maryland. Maryland does a fantastic job listening to our stakeholders and inviting us to the table and actually trying to solve the problem. So I continuously invite them. If they can't go to the daytime meetings, meet them at night. You need to listen to the boots on the ground.
Okay, thank you, Jacqueline.
And I would just echo that, just as much as you can be inclusive and also transparent as you're wrestling through the hard issues that you're wrestling through. As operators, we not only represent the business side, but what that really means is we are representing our teachers, our center leaders, and our families and our children, and we want to have a voice at the table with you because we're wrestling through some very tough issues together, and it's only by working together we come close to solving them.
Yeah, so I'll just close the question with just, reminding folks, providers are feeling really underappreciated right now. They're feeling pretty beat up. It's been a rough couple of years, whether you want to talk about universal pre-K or reduced rates, but they're really just feeling a struggle and a strain. I think you could hear it in Lottie's voice there. And that, just a reminder, these are basically mission-driven small businesses. They're there because of kids and family, but at the end of the day, they need to make a living. Otherwise, they just aren't going to do it. So as everybody has said here, we're here as allies. We're here to help you in any way you can. We know that we're all here for the same reasons. And so leverage the relationship with your providers to potentially, again, I'll throw on my advocacy hat. There are things we can do as advocates that you cannot do as administration. So leverage those relationships.
That's a good point. So let's thank our panel, and then we'll go to comments and questions. You're all really fantastic. I got a lot out of it. I think everyone else did. So, Steve, thoughts?
Thank you, Shannon. Let me just say briefly that this was a very, very fruitful discussion. I think we've gotten a lot of the challenges on the table. I don't think there are any great surprises as to what those challenges are, but we had some really interesting perspectives on how to meet them. My number one takeaway is that it was brilliant on your part to do this, because at the federal level, our partners, and we're very conscious of our relationship of partnership. Our partners are the states. The state partners are the providers. And I think sessions such as this need to be going on in every state. I think that the partners need to be, the providers rather, need to be convened regularly for conversations about what's happening in the states. One of our challenges is to be supportive in a situation where there's tremendous flexibility for the states, and every state environment is going to be different. Some of the notes I made is I think we can be helpful by ensuring that there's visibility over the innovation that's occurring in the various states. And several panelists mentioned exciting programs going on in individual states. I think that's great, and we ought to do everything we can to provide everyone visibility over those innovations. And, to the extent it's helpful to make comparisons between the environment in various states, I think we can be helpful doing that, and encourage the panelists to send you their questions on, what is it that would be useful to take a look at. So we continue to want to find ways to be supportive of our state partners, and I really hope you'll all provide your suggestions to us on how we can do that.
Thanks, Steve. It means a lot to me, and I think to everyone here, that you sat through, stayed, and listened, and were here. So thank you.
My pleasure.
We do have some minutes, right, Tricia? We have about 10. So we have people around the room with the microphones, and because we have people on the phone or telecast, it's good to wait for that microphone. So questions of the panel, or Steve, or me? Since the panel is our special superstar, probably them.
Hi there. My name is Muriel Stebbins. I'm with Region 7 in Kansas City. I want to speak directly to Ms. Brown and Ms. Grant. I want to let you know that 29 years ago, I was a young military spouse, and somebody approached me and said, "You can make a lot of money staying home watching other people's kids." I very quickly found out I had been misinformed. However, the time that I did work as a family child care provider at the ripe age of 19 years old was one of the most enriching experiences of my life. And later in life, when I had my own children, I chose to put them in family child care homes simply because I knew the value of that experience. And if you had a good family child care provider, how that would have a lasting, lifelong impact on your children. And that happened to me. And on top of that, because of social media, about 2 years ago, I attended the wedding of a little girl who attended my family child care home as an infant. So I just wanted to stand up and say thank you for your courage to get up here in front of this really tough crowd and advocate for your field and the people in your field and the hard work that you do. Thank you for your service.
Hi, I'm Tracy Gruber from Utah, the state administrator, and this is more of a comment. First, thank you for bringing this panel together. I think it's really important that not only providers view us as partners, but we view you as partners, and I think it's a little discouraging to hear that we don't act that way always. I don't think it's for lack of recognizing the importance of our relationship. We do see you as critical partners, and we can do a better job of communicating that to you and incorporating you in our decision making. What I will say is that, kind of echoing what Shannon said about the difficulties of finding the resources to invest in early childhood at the state level, I think everyone in this room agrees that it's important, but that doesn't necessarily lead to decision making on that front. And to that end, government has kind of tipped the market for childcare, has influenced the market in a really significant way. So the market hasn't kind of also caught up, and I'm thinking primarily of business. Businesses need childcare, and they need to begin to start coming to the table because in some ways, government is filling that gap for them so profoundly that they don't have to invest. And they benefit in very dramatic ways. So hopefully in the future and in our state level, we can start bringing business into this conversation and have them recognize the value of that, and maybe they'll start making investments as well.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Nizer with Maryland, and I just wanted to say, make a comment. We have a very strong provider associations in Maryland. Our family child care president is Jackie, and thank you for being up there today, Jackie. But I want you to know that the things that you're sitting there and you're saying that what you want us to know, we know. We do know, and we're thinking the same things that you are, and we're struggling with the same things that you are. And if there's any states here that don't bring in providers and ask them their opinions, that's why Maryland has such a strong quality rating system. That's why we have such a strong credentialing system for teachers, is because we did include providers and got their input, because if you get the input and you're working together, of course people buy in much easier and can go out and talk about it to other people. So I think that that's been a critical piece in Maryland, is bringing the providers to the table on almost everything. Now, there are some things that we're not going to be able to do, but also the transparency of being able to say, we're not going to be able to do this, and this is why, is important also. And then I think once you talk to providers, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jackie and Lottie, once you talk to providers and you explain why something can't happen or why something can happen, it makes it a much easier conversation moving forward and getting people to buy in. So thank you for what you do, and I know family child care providers that are, if there's anyone watching that's a family child care provider and anyone that's done, we're very proud of the things that you are doing, and thank you.
Thanks. Any nuts and bolts questions for them? Okay, go ahead.
So, it's on? Okay. Nathan Hoover from Washington State. Do you view the child care business model, utilizing high-quality practices, succeeding in the market without government subsidy, or is subsidy necessary for market-sustainable success?
It's clear most families can't afford what it costs. I mean, people often wonder, why is it that childcare costs so much more than other things? Like even K-12 education, well, think about it. In Minnesota, there's about 23 kindergartners per kindergarten teacher. They're there about 6-7 hours a day. In early childhood, in an infant room, you may have 3 children per adult, and we're open 12.5 hours a day. And we're open 52 weeks a year, with just a few legal holidays, and yet you look at the research, the real way to change the cost of care without reducing wages is to increase ratios. Well, the research shows the most critical part of a child's development is the teacher-child interactions. We know that adults or human beings don't have litters of children for a reason. Babies need close adult interactions, and so the reality is, I think this country does a lot of things to support certain parts of our population. One of the smartest things we can do is support young families with little kids, because our future depends on it. We have an aging workforce. We had the lowest birth rate in 50 years in 2017, and other countries who made major moves in significant areas did so when they saw demographics that scared them. It happened in Canada, and they started changing tax policies and increased incentives for people to have children and tax credits to do that. There are ways to support all young families in larger ways than we're doing today, and this country is just behind. And someday they're gonna wake up and realize most of our government spending is on seniors who are aging. How are we going to support them if no one's having babies who are eventually going to have jobs? So I say no. Right now we need government intervention, but we need a lot more.
And maybe just to kind of piggyback on what Chad said, I mean, I think we have to stop thinking of early childhood education as an expense and understand that it's an investment, and totally, preaching to the choir here. I have spent a fair amount of time in other countries and seeing the degree of understanding the families have about the importance of early childhood education, as well as the investments that governments are making in terms of providing access to families so they can have their children, even when they have even in some countries where they have a very extensive sort of nanny network that's, typically women who are very, very low paid, who are watching the children. Those families still are making choices to have their children in early learning programs, and the government is supporting that experience for families. And those are the nations that are rising. Certainly Singapore is a great example, a relatively affluent country, because they invested in human capital and because they have significantly invested in early childhood education, because they know that is the future of their nation and of their families. So we absolutely need the government to continue to support families. Otherwise, we're going to create a divide in our nation that is even greater than it is today if we don't make sure that every child has the best start in life.
And I'll just add one final, is this on? Okay. I'll add one final thought to that as well. As we think about the role of government in this, we talk a lot about the impact, the business impact of childcare, and we really talk about it in three ways, right? There is the current workforce. We need to be supporting our current workforce so that our parents can go to work and know that their children are in a quality environment in which they're thriving. We know that if parents are worried about the safety of their children, are they thriving, they're not working and they're not producing, and so our current workforce is struggling. There's the future workforce. I think we've all identified that. If we don't get these children prepared for school and life, we are going to have significant impacts later on that we are just not going to be able to recover from. And then I think we need to highlight that in this field, this is one of the best opportunities to support women business owners. And so I think we need to call that out and know that there's a role for government to support those women entrepreneurs.